During film school, I was working whenever I could as a PA, production assistant, or as a gopher, anything I could get. And after film school, drove a taxi, had several jobs, and also at the same time also moonlight and writing, and I had several jobs on porno films as a PA, production assistant, and also on some quality television films for that they used to do for the public television in those days. And eventually I got hired for a film called Midnight Express, which they had developed from a book, and they were looking for a low-budget film. And it really lucked out because it was a big success, huge success worldwide, and that launched my career. Well, I had been actually a very ambitious young writer. At the age of 19, I wrote a novel which is called A Child's Night Dream, which is actually published 30 years later. And it's a view of life at that age, young, turbulent, turmoil, suffering. An interesting book. But after service in the Army in Vietnam, I came back to the United States, really a bit lost out of interest, curiosity. I went to New York University Film School, which at that time was just starting up on the GI Bill. And I had taken up in the last part of my tour in Vietnam photography and shot some of the beautiful colors of Vietnam and jungles. And eventually at school I really combined the desire to write with the desire to make a 360 presentation. And that was visual and oral came together at film school slowly. I mean, I was one of the few students at film school who went to film screenwriting class because there was not much interest at that time. It was the 1960s, late 60s, and people wanted to improv and do very much the French New Wave kind of. So I went and I wrote screenplays every year in the belief that a good story would lead finally to a chance to direct, which it did. I mean, obviously Midnight Express was for another director, as was Scarface, but I learned a lot on those films. Scarface, for example, I was on the set every day pretty much for 6 months. It went on, but I learned a lot by watching. If you keep your eyes open on a set, you learn. And but I kept writing. I have to emphasize that writing is very important. Well, I'm known for, I guess, some hard-hitting contemporary films, but I also was interested in westerns and classical history, and I did all forms of screenwriting. Some of these films are crime films, some of them are about finance, some about Wall Street, some about war, and some about presidents. So, this is all, I'm charting my growth of consciousness as I get older. I think that was what was going on, trying to know more about the subject matter and being curious about not only the world around me, but my own consciousness of it. It took me a while to learn a lot. I started to do documentaries later in my life, and in addition to film. I can't speak for anyone else but myself, and the subjects I chose were always difficult. I don't remember. I mean, you realize that Platoon has turned down 10 years worth of rejections, and so was The Born on the Fourth of July, which is also about a Vietnam veteran. These subjects were taboo in a way. They were realistic looks at the war, not the American militarism, celebration of heroes and so forth. This is another style. I've always had resistance. JFK was an extremely complicated case, bringing miles of research, years of into perspective in a 3-hour and 8-minute movie. In other words, I think some of me likes the challenge. You just climb the higher mountain. Snowden was impossible because it was in the news, and there was so much controversy, and at the same time, he was considered in the United States a villain, by more people than admired him. So it was like 60% against him, 30. And we did not get any studio financing. That was back to my days on Salvador, actually, and the Platoon, where I was looking for any kind of money to make the film. Snowden was the French and the Germans. So we made the film in Munich. We transferred the location to Germany because we felt we were a little bit worried about the United States, his view of this. So everything has been difficult, and I can't ever tell any young filmmaker that it gets easier. You might think it gets easier, but maybe you're not trying your hardest. So every film is a privilege to make and should be treated as such. And the budgets are tighter and tighter because drama has declined as a subject of interest, and the increasingly corporate fantasy-laden world. And, drama is built on tension and sometimes discomfort. And I think the movie-going experience has been reduced to does it make money or not? And the easiest way to make money is to please them. I wanted to do a film about Wall Street. It was about my father's world, the mood, the atmosphere. My father was a stockbroker, and I'd been down to his offices in the 50s, 60s, 1960s, and I respected him a lot. So it was about a father-son story, but it took on another quirk when we added the character of Gecko, who was a modern, our version of a modern buccaneer on Wall Street, who had not existed really before. That was a new kind of 1980s finance. Michael Douglas was a supporting role. He stole the show, as they say. The villain sometimes does. But I think a lot of it was misunderstood. He was not a character to admire. He was admired for the wrong reasons. His costumes, his ruthlessness, his greed. But Charlie was the principal and played the role very straight, as he had done in Platoon. Platoon was semi-autobiographical. It was about my time in Vietnam in 67, 8. And I never thought it would get done. One day it did. An English company actually made it. And very low budget. And we struggled to make it in the Philippines. And no one would have predicted that it took off the way it did. It was quite a shock. It just went around the world. It was just universally recognized. It was bizarre, but the way it suddenly happened like that, it's quite a rush for a director, a writer-director. No, I think there's always compromises, and I also think there's collaboration that goes on. Collaboration is fascinating because actors do bring in sometimes a different tenor to this thing, as well as the director of photography, the production designer, the producers, all kinds of collaboration go on through the process. But I do urge any young director to keep in mind the spirit of the thing. That's what writing keeps me in touch with that, or co-writing. I fight like hell to keep the essence of what I see as the movie, but still, it undergoes modification. The biggest influence on my career is the experience of life, I suppose. That's very raw, frontline experience. You are the only one living your life. It is, in a sense, novel and at the same time very painful. So it's your reaction to the phenomenon around you. That's really been the great experience of my life. And telling your own story in some ways through other people. It's really about finding yourself. And I'm still, at my age, I seem older, but in many ways I still feel like I'm a young man experiencing the world. The best advice you can give a director is be open to life and try to be self-conscious of it as it goes. Try to see what's unique about it, what's original in your dialogue. Try to remember some of your dialogue and try to remember the things, how you reacted, and be generous, but at the same time be critical of yourself. Sometimes we don't behave as well as we should and as we think we should. I think arrogance sometimes gets in the way of that. I think we all believe in ourselves. Sometimes we lose sight of ourselves. So much stress for nothing life can be sometimes. Sometimes you worry too much, sometimes you fight too hard, and you lose, but you never get the chance to go back, and you know that, unless you're in a movie.